So today we're going to be learning the 4 elements of a strong fundraising culture. We're also going to do an exercise called money stories, which some of you may or may not have done in the past. And that's a fun exercise that I encourage groups to do as they're trying to build their fundraising culture in their organization. So it's a tool we're going to use today. And then I'd encourage you to actually take that tool and use it in your organizations as well. And the third big thing we're going to do is to identify ways to build and strengthen your fundraising team. So fundraising culture is, and it sounds very abstract, but really what it's about is creating really strong fundraising teams and ways of people working together as groups to do this kind of fundraising with donors. So that's really what it's all about. And that's what we're going to spend our time on today. Great. So I'm going to start us off with an exercise I really love to do. I do it with a lot of groups. It's called, What's Your Money Story, or Money Stories. And I'm not sure if folks have seen this before. If you have seen it or done it before, it's still always really fun to do. I just did it recently for the first time with my husband. I realized I've done this with like dozens of people, dozens of groups and trainings all over the world, and never did it with my husband. And it was really interesting to hear what his personal money story is, because it really has an impact on us in our everyday lives now, and then especially as fundraisers, people who are actually actively talking about money, trying to raise money, trying to mobilize resources for our organizations. It's especially important for us to be aware of our money story and how that might be affecting our ability to raise funds. So for this exercise, we're going to break into pairs in just a minute. I'm going to give you some instructions before we do that. And what you're going to do in your pairs is you're going to answer 2 questions. So one is, what is your earliest memory of money? So for example, in the previous slide, I showed this little picture of a Coke bottle, because my earliest memory of money was when I was about 5 years old. My mom was a single mom and she was a hairdresser. And so sometimes on the weekends when she didn't have childcare, I had to go with her to work in San Francisco at the time. And I would make coffee, instant coffee. This was back in the 70s when there was no Starbucks, there was no Peet's coffee back then. They had instant coffee with hot water in salons. So I was tasked to make coffee for her clients, for her ladies, and they would give me a quarter or 50 cents. And I would collect my little, sort of fees, and I would go down to the corner store and buy a bottle of Coke, like a glass bottle of Coke, the good Coke, right? And then I would drink it, and then I learned that I could bring the bottle back for a deposit, and I was so excited because it was like, wow, I made money, and then I had my Coke, and then I still have money left. Like, it was super exciting to me. So that's my earliest memory of money. Yours might be something different. So that's the first question: is what's your earliest memory of money? The second question you'll talk about with your partner is, how did your family talk about money when you were growing up? So, and when I say your family, I mean your family of origin, whoever that was, whoever you sort of spent your most time with growing up. So not the family you live in now, but the family of origin, the family you grew up in. How did they talk about money or not talk about money? Because that's often the case. So any questions about the exercise before we break into pairs? Again, you can raise your hand and use the raise hand feature, or throw your questions in the chat, or just unmute. We're all good? Okay, so Hugo, you can go ahead and break folks into pairs, and we'll stay in pairs for about 7-8 minutes. Let's do 8 minutes, and then we'll come back and see how it went. Welcome back. Hi, everybody. And we have a new attendee, Hugo Morales has joined us, for those of us who know Hugo. Hugo, if you want to put your name and organization and anything you'd like to get out of the training today in the chat, feel free to do that. And we're just coming back from the breakout rooms. Hopefully everybody got the chance to speak. I'm sorry if we cut you off. It's always a little hard to know how much time it's taking, because I can't see you or hear you like I could in a regular room. But yeah, I'm curious to hear what came up for folks. Were there some interesting memories that came up for you? Any kind of realizations about your money stories that was interesting? Anything you'd like to share? And you can unmute, obviously, or throw things in the chat, either way. Anyone like to share?
I was just looking for Rachel, but I don't see her. She was mid-sentence, I think, summing up her thoughts when we came back. Oh, there she is. But the lead into that is, like, money was a motivator for us. It got us as kids to do our chores. We were encouraged to help recycle in the days when you would drive all your recycling to this facility and actually get money back. And it wasn't for us, but so it was definitely used as a motivator throughout my childhood, but we never had a conversation about money that was anything other than, even though we had a little, it was always enough. So I never had this worry growing up about money. There just wasn't a bunch of it. And I realized that that's carried through and allowed me to shift my career to a focus on mission and cause and not acquiring enough money, because I still have that feeling that I still get to do whatever I want to do with what I have. So that was an interesting connection. Thank you.
Great, thanks for sharing. Yeah. Anyone else want to share a memory or just anything interesting that came up for you in this exercise? There's no right or wrong answer, and just curious. It's always interesting to hear.
I'll jump in and follow up to that, because that's what we were responding to. It was that story of sort of always feeling like enough, whereas Adrienne and I both had something opposite, where it was actually, we remember conversations more about scarcity, even though we look back, like I know we had enough money, but the conversations were definitely more about not having enough, which also I think has lasted me a long time in my life to kind of get past, is kind of switching the mindset from scarcity to abundance in my own life as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. One thing that comes up a lot in these exercises is people don't have a lot of memories of money being talked about, or not in a very direct way, right? Or if money was talked about, sometimes it was very stressful, right? There were fights, there was things that were difficult about it. And then there are also examples of people having positive, memories of money being talked about very openly with family. And it's really across the board in my experience. Anybody else want to share anything that came up in this exercise for you, or just any realization, surprises, interesting stories? And feel free to unmute. We have time for one more if anyone wants to share. Okay, so why I like to do this exercise in the beginning of trainings like this is because when we talk about fundraising culture and building a stronger culture of fundraising in our organizations, this exercise is super, super helpful, right? So, because fundraising is talking about money, right? We're going to talk about money with our donors, with our staff, with our board, with whoever is being involved in our fundraising work. And so there are often kind of hidden tensions, hidden challenges, or hidden strengths that your staff or your board or the people that are going to be on your fundraising team have around money. And this exercise helps to surface some of those so that they can just be aware of them. None of us is coming to this work being like a perfect, perfect person to talk about money. We all, none of us have like the perfect pitch down. It's an ongoing evolution. But I think being aware of like how our past can sometimes have an effect on our present is really important. So, the next question I will ask you, which we're not going to have time to answer today, but thinking about your money stories, how do you feel like these stories affect your ability or your willingness to fundraise today, right? So does fundraising feel very easeful to you? Does it feel difficult? Does it feel like something you like to do? Is it something you dislike? And how is your money story possibly the root of some of that, right? And it doesn't mean that then you can't change if you want to change, but it's often the first step is just being aware of like what that history is, so that you can know that if that fear comes up, if that tension comes up, or even if the positive feelings come up, like, well, that came from somewhere, right? And I also think just talking about money in general can be really a great exercise and a preparation for fundraising. The more we talk about money, which is often not done in a very healthy way in our society, the more comfortable we get talking about it with donors, with funders, with other people, right? So the talking about money and just breaking the silence around it in and of itself is a very useful exercise. So thanks for participating in that exercise with me. And that's an exercise, like I said, you can go ahead and take these questions, do this with your staff and board, especially, as you're prepping into like a fundraising campaign or any kind of discussion about funding or fundraising. This can be a really good exercise just to kind of surface some of those past histories and stories that people might be holding on to and maybe not even be aware of. Yeah. All right. So we're going to talk a little bit now about why I focus on individual donors. And this is probably going to be a little repetition for some of you, so please bear with me. We're going to go through it pretty quickly. But you all probably have seen this information. Nonprofit funding comes from various sources. There's a lot of nonprofits, 1.5 million and probably more because this data might be a little outdated, a couple years old. 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States alone generate more than $1 trillion in income every year. About a third of that comes from the government. About half of it comes from earned income. So that's things like, tuition or fees or, payments at a hospital, which is a nonprofit hospital, tickets at a theater, that kind of thing. And then 20% of the income comes from the private sector, which is what we're going to focus on today. And so the private sector is foundations, individuals, corporations, primarily, also bequests that come from individuals. So that 20% is what we're going to focus on today in terms of individual donors. And if you took that 20% from the private sector and kind of zoomed in on it, right, then you get this pie. So of that 1.4 trillion or whatever it was, about 500 billion, close to 500 billion comes from private sector, right? And so this is data from 2019. So it's the most recent data that's from an organization called Giving USA. And they do this report every year where they look at all the Form 990s, which is the form you have to fill out if you're a nonprofit every year to keep your status. They look at all the Form 990s to see where groups are getting their income from. And so what can anybody tell me where most of this money comes from right now? You can go ahead and unmute or you can throw it in the chat. Where does most of the private funding come from right now for nonprofits?
I would say individuals.
It's individuals.
Individuals, right? Yeah, so 69% comes from individuals. That's about 300 billion. And then if you look at the 10%, which is a couple lines down, that's a giving from bequests, which is also individuals, right? That's people leaving money for nonprofits in their wills or estates. So close to 80% from year to year, it really doesn't change that much of this $450 billion comes from individuals. So it's a significant amount of money from the private sector for nonprofits. So hopefully this is something that you know already. This is why for Klein and Roth Consulting, we focus on individual donors versus foundations or corporations, because that's really where most of the money is as far as private giving to nonprofits, okay? And then who gives that money, right? Who are the people that make up that 80% of where the private sector money comes from? Well, it's usually people like us. A lot of the people in this room, 70% of adults give money, and they give to a lot of different groups. So 5 to 10 organizations on average, equal numbers of men and women, and people of all income levels. And if you've done any kind of individual donor fundraising, you've probably seen this, right? There's people who are very wealthy, people who are not well off. They're all donors to your organization, right? So there can be a misperception often that wealthier people give more, or they're the only people we should cultivate. And that's just really a myth. It's really the reality is that most people give money away, and most people of all income levels. And actually poorer people who are lower income tend to give a higher percentage of their income away because they just don't have as much, right? But they also often see the needs that are in the community more directly. And so they are giving money away at a higher percentage of their income than people who have more wealth. So this is all another kind of review that I want to just go over because this is important for us when we talk about fundraising culture and teams. It's really important to remember that fundraising is about building relationships. So this is not just about money. It's about money, yes, but it's about building relationships with donors. We're not just trying to squeeze our donors for as much money as we can get and then sort of throw them over our shoulder and we're done. We want to build a long-term relationship with them, both so that they'll continue to give, but also so that we can sort of engage them in our work in other ways, right? Donors can often be volunteers, they can become board members, they can become staff, right? There's lots of different ways that donors can become more deeply engaged in our work. And so just wanted to go over quickly the ladder of engagement that we use in fundraising often when we're talking about donors. And so the first step in that ladder is to acquire a donor or just get them to make a first gift. So that's what we call in fundraising, we call it acquisition. And so that's important, obviously, because they're not a donor until they make a donation to your organization. So that's the first thing we try to do is get everybody who we think might be supportive of our work to make one gift. It can be $5, it can be $50, it can be $500, but to make at least one gift to our organization. Then we thank them. And these little arrows in the chart here are kind of what we call cultivation. So thanking people, informing them about what we do, letting them know how their money was spent. All those things are represented by the arrows here. And so after someone makes a first gift, after maybe, 6 months or a year, or maybe even less, we try to get them back, right? We try to retain them as donors. We try to make sure that they continue to give. And some of them will, and some of them won't, right? That's just the way it goes. But if we don't ask them again, we're definitely not going to have them come back and make a second gift. And so that's called retention, right? The activities that we do to try to keep donors in our donor pool are called retention strategies. So we thank them again, give them more information, maybe invite them to an event, keep cultivating them. And then the next step is really to try to get those donors to give a little more. So I'm not talking about going from 50 to 5,000. I'm talking about maybe going from 50 to 100, right? And doing this incrementally and slowly over time in a systematic way. And this is what we call upgrading donors. This kind of strategy is really important for you to go from just having a base of donors that doesn't really grow or doesn't really bring in more money every year, to really kind of exponentially growing your donor program. Because if you have like 100 donors, even say, and they've been giving you $50 on average for the last 5 years, if you just went and did a campaign to ask all of those people to double their gift, you can see how automatically, just do the math, you're going to raise more money from the exact same number of people, right? Not all of them are going to give more, but some of them will. And you'll plan into that, right? But just asking for more money actually does help you raise more money. It sounds, very simple and logical, because it is, but that's how it works. So upgrading donors is really an important step, and where a lot of groups, I think, often kind of fall off when they're building a donor base. They forget to ask people for more money, and then they get frustrated when they're not raising very much. And then I always ask them, well, when was the last time you asked people to give more? And they go, oh, we never do that. And it's like, well, maybe you should try it and see what happens, right? And then the last step on this ladder, so we've asked people to give once, they've given, we asked them to give again. Later on, we asked them to give more. If we do our relationship building with donors well, at the end of all this, some of them may give us a final gift of a bequest, right? It's unlikely that any donor would make a bequest or planned gift to you without having been a donor for several years. It's just not very common, because it really requires that long-term relationship, right? They get to know you, they know you're a worthy cause, they know you're a trustworthy organization that manages its money well. And so this final gift is really the result of a long-term engagement. And bequests are not often, they're not always made just by wealthy people, right? A lot of middle-class people and even working people sometimes have, modest to significant estates that they then pass on to organizations. So it's not something that is only for the very wealthy. Again, there's a lot of just regular folks, you'd be surprised, who do make bequests and leave money for nonprofits in their wills. So not to say that this is something you should strive for with every donor, but it's just something to keep in mind, that could be like a long-term consequence of building relationships with donors over time, is getting those kinds of gifts. So let me just stop there and see if there's any questions about this little review we did so far, anything around the relationship building piece or around who gives money to nonprofits.
Rachel did bring up a question about, she says, I always have questions about how best to bring donors along with more progressive fundraising conversations. They've lost donors in the past after putting out solidarity statements. Not sure if that's something you can answer, Rona.
Yeah, that's a good question, Rachel. So I guess I would ask you, have you tried to follow up and have conversations with those donors, like either on the phone or in person? And I know you probably can't talk to all of them, but have you actually been able to have a conversation with them?
Yeah, I mean, the one particular moment I'm thinking of, the donor didn't really seem to want to have any conversations. It was very much related to a statement about school to prison pipeline and kind of serving formerly incarcerated folks and tying that to racial equity as like a system. Like basically they didn't agree that systemic racism was related to anything like that. So they were like, no, it's a pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We kind of want to support formerly incarcerated students, but not if you're actually going to tie it to systemic racism. And so they didn't really want to have that conversation, but we tried.
Mm-hmm. So you tried, and there's going to be some donors that you lose, right? That's just going to be part of it, especially when you take stances that might be controversial to some people. What I would say, the solution isn't necessarily to keep trying to get those donors back, although I would, unless the person says, I don't want to hear from you anymore, I would probably still keep them on my list, right? Even if they stop giving, if they're okay with that. If they're not, then obviously you respect their wishes and you take them off your list. But you never know, if somebody stops giving now, they may have a change of heart, especially now there's a lot of people really rethinking a lot of their kind of core beliefs around things that have happened in this last year around racial justice and, social movements. And so, like I said, as long as they're okay with staying on your list, keep them on their list, continue to talk to them in that low key way. And then, I would focus then on trying to expand your base of donors beyond, the people that, to help trying to replace some of the people that you lost. That's why acquisition never really ends. So at a certain point, you have to just kind of cut your losses and not continue to try to bring those people back. But I do have confidence that, the long game is that hopefully they'll come back if we're all doing our work properly and they come around to some of these issues because they're getting information from different sources that, yes, it is about systemic racism. They may come back to you, which is why I'm saying keep them on your list if you can, because they may actually return to you. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, the other thing here from Caitlin, it's more of a statement in what they're looking to learn, but they want to know how you can transition current clients to who currently receive services for your organization to donors themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I actually wrote an article about this, which I can have the fund send out afterwards. So it really is just about figuring out the best and most appropriate way to ask them to be donors. So I'm not sure what your organization does or what kind of service you provide. But for example, in the article that I wrote, I interviewed a health clinic and then I interviewed a legal clinic that provide free services to, low-income people. And so they had different ways that they handled the ask, so for the health clinic, for example, it was never the healthcare provider that asked for money from the client or the patient. It was always somebody outside. And it was always made clear that your gift is not contingent. It does not, we're not asking you to pay for services. Like your services are always free. We're just offering you the opportunity to make a donation if you feel like it. And this will not have any impact on the services that you're being provided, right? And so, so just figuring out for your own organization, when is the right time to do the ask and what's the pitch? What is the thing that you want to say to folks that are receiving the services that will be compelling enough for them to want to give? I would say most of the time they're going to want to give, right? And what might be harder is just, harder for your staff or the people who are asking to feel confident doing the ask. That's been my experience. So yeah, we could talk about more about that offline or one-on-one, unless other people want to talk about that. But it's not often that the donors or the clients don't want to give. It's often that the staff feel uncomfortable making that ask. So I would focus on really training the people who are asking to become more confident and clear and making sure that they know that this is not a hard ask. It's not a forced ask. It's just an invitation for the clients to become donors. So yeah.
Okay. And then Rona, it's actually something to what you said to Rachel's response or question. Hugo Morales here asks, for how long should you keep donors after they don't contribute for say 2 or 3 years in a row?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it depends on how you're contacting them. So if it's over email, the kind of standard practice now is you just don't take them off your list because it doesn't cost very much to contact them, right? So you don't take them off the list unless they ask to be taken off. If you're doing snail mail, which does cost more money, I don't know if you're doing that, Hugo, then I would say, after 3 years, I would probably take them off. If you haven't heard from them or if you have a sense that they're not interested. So I'm not sure. It depends on email versus snail mail. Snail mail is more expensive. So I would say no more than 3 years. I wouldn't keep them on the list anymore. But for email, I would just keep them on indefinitely, to be quite honest. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, I think that's it for now, Rona.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. All right, so let's keep going. And so, oops, let's see, did I miss something? Yeah, so now we're going to get into like the team piece and like how does this, so you have all this kind of basic information about fundraising. So how do we actually like make our fundraising stronger, right? How do we make our fundraising culture stronger? And so some of the stuff I'm talking about today comes from a report that was done a few years ago by the firm that I work with, Klein and Roth Consulting, and funded by the Evelyn and Walter Haas Jr. Fund, called Fundraising Bright Spots, which basically looked at several organizations that have really strong donor programs and looked at what are they doing that is helping them do this, right? What is helping them be a really strong fundraising organization? And one of the themes that they found was that in those groups, fundraising is very broadly distributed, right? So it's not just a couple people that do it. It's really like a team of people. Staff do it, board do it, there's volunteers that do it. And so to do individual donor fundraising really well, you do have to have several people involved, as many people as possible. And people like the development director or whoever's coordinating that team does play more of a coordination role rather than the person who's going out and raising all the money. And that's just a numbers game, right? When you're talking about raising money from individuals, you have to interact with as many people as possible in order to ask them, right? So one person can only ask, a very few number of people, even over email, right? And the more personalized you're asking, obviously, the more successful your fundraising is going to be. So the more people you have involved, making phone calls, texting, meeting with donors, all those more personal ways of raising money, the more successful your individual donor program is going to be. So this is really a key theme and why we're focusing on fundraising culture today. And so these are the 4 signs, what I consider the 4 signs of a healthy fundraising culture. And we're going to, in a second, have you think about where the fundraising culture in your organizations are at, like where do you fit right now in terms of these 4 signs? So one is that everybody participates in fundraising, right? It doesn't mean that everybody does fundraising all the time, obviously, because that wouldn't make any sense. People have to run the programs, people have to, run the office, people have to do other things, speak to the media. But at some point, at least a couple times a year, every year, everybody's doing fundraising. It might be a certain campaign, it might be working on an event, but everybody participates in fundraising in some kind of way, at least a couple times a year. Another sign of a healthy fundraising culture is that fundraising is talked about regularly. So regularly being maybe like once a month, in like a all staff or like a group environment. So not just with like the development staff or with the executive director, but with, everybody in the organization. And again, this doesn't have to be like long 4-hour conversations, but just checking in about fundraising. How is it going? How are we doing? Are we hitting our goals? In other words, it's not something that's a taboo subject to bring up, right? It's something that's spoken about openly and with a healthy attitude that this is something that we all need to know about, right? And engage with. And so related to that, there's 2 other signs on the left in the purple triangle is a sense of belonging to a team. So when we're fundraising together for individual donor money, we should feel like we're not doing it by ourselves, right? We might do like our individual asks by ourselves or call donors by ourselves, but we should always feel like, oh, there's a team of folks that I can go to ask for help if I'm stuck on something, or if I'm feeling a lack of confidence, if I'm feeling uncomfortable, if I want to do a role play. It should always feel like this is a team effort and not just one person again, or a couple people stuck in a corner, kind of doing this by themselves and hoping that they succeed, right? This is something that we're doing together. And that relates also to the last sign, which is a collective ownership of fundraising. And that means not just when we do things really well, that we own it as a group, but also when there's challenges, right? So sometimes things don't go so well. And for individual donor fundraising, especially, that can be, the cause can be many, many things. It could be that the people on the team didn't follow through. Well, that's not the development manager's fault then. If they gave people tasks and those people didn't follow through on their tasks, that's something that we have to take responsibility of, as people, as a group. So just to make sure that we're taking collective ownership of both, when we do really great and we meet our goals and we had a great event, but also when things don't go so well, being able to look at what were all the different moving pieces that led to this kind of outcome, and how can we all take responsibility for what happened, right? So those are the 4 signs. Any questions about that?
Rona, there is one here. You did mention this is something that everybody on the organization should do. But what if you hire someone and they don't know that they're supposed to be doing fundraising? You hire them for something else, and then you tell them, hey, you actually do have to participate in fundraising. Like, is there a way that you bring that up?
Yeah, so in a minute, I'm going to talk about some of the ways to build a fundraising culture, like some steps. And so I think when we talk about champions, fundraising champions, that's a way to address that. So this kind of work, when you're trying to shift, especially staff or board members who've never had to fundraise before to do fundraising, it can be challenging and it can take some time. So one thing that I like to do is to engage staff or board, either one or both, in creating their own baseline for what fundraising participation looks like as a group. So for you, Hugo, I would say, as an organization, can you sit down with your staff, your whole staff, even if it's a small staff, doesn't matter, and say, what do we want the baseline participation of fundraising to look like? What's the bare minimum that we're asking everybody to do. And some people will do more, right? I'm assuming Hugo that you do more because you're the director. But you know, what's the bare minimum that we all have to do, and have them come up with the basic, you know, so that it's not just sort of the top down, you're going to do this, you know, you have no choice. It's like, well, what are you willing to do? And I'm going to prepare you and help you do that and be confident in doing that. But then they have some agency and power over what that something is. That's just one place you can start. And then later we'll talk about some other strategies, but that's one specific thing you might want to try. And for Karen, also with the board, same thing. I would have a board member, actually not a staff person, not you, if you're not the board member. I would have a board member initiate on the board level, so at a board meeting, hey, y'all, we need to do more fundraising. What do we want that to look like, right? And that could take a few meetings. It could take a little while. It might need to be a subcommittee that sort of delves into that more. But again, getting them to come up with a baseline. And it might be a very low one in the beginning, and that's okay, as long as they're doing something and knowing that that's going to lead to more participation later on down the line. Okay, so hopefully that helps. Any other questions?
Can I follow up a little bit?
Sure.
So sometimes the board, they give. So once they make their gift, they consider that they're involved in fundraising already. But some, you know, how do you push them a little bit beyond that? Same thing, like have a board member have the conversation of what else can we do, or where do we go from here?
So there's in a lot of board trainings, they use this term time, talent, treasure, right? As like the three things that board members should always be contributing to an organization. So time is obviously their time, right? Coming to meetings, doing work. Talent is their skills, you know, it can be fundraising skills, it can be other kinds of skills, and treasure, those three things. So the gift is one thing. The fundraising is something else. It's not that, so I think it's important for you guys to distinguish how it's both. It's not one or the other. It's not like you gave and you're done, right? And I don't know if you have a policy for the board as well as for staff. It is helpful to have like a clear board policy that spells out what is the board's base level expectation around fundraising and around donating, right? So if you don't have that, I can send out something to you later that is like a form that you can use just to get the conversation started. But that does help to have it on paper. And then it can take a little while to make it really happen. But at least if you have an agreement kind of on paper and in your board minute notes, there is some collective understanding like, oh, okay, it's not just enough to make a gift, right? I have to make a gift and I need to ask 10 of my friends to make a donation. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Any questions about these 4 signs of a healthy fundraising culture, or any other, you know, kind of things that people would add to that list if you feel like you come from a group with a really strong fundraising culture? Okay, well, what I'm going to do now is have you actually, yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I have my camera off because I'm eating, but
No problem. I know it's lunch.
So I just wanted to add that this piece about getting your staff kind of on board around fundraising, I wanted to make a suggestion, because one of the things that we do is we have like an elevator pitch that's like written out that has points that people can hit if they feel like they're not sure what to say. So I find that can be really helpful, because part of it is how to communicate with people. And it's like, you don't actually have to ask people for money. You just have to say, you know, we look for support and here's the reasons why. And I think sometimes that can really inspire people to give. So I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, thank you. And please, if folks have other ideas to offer, this is definitely like a time where I want you to learn from each other, because you're really out there in the trenches, like doing this every day, and you're going to have awesome ideas that I won't even think about. So thank you, Adrian, for offering that. Any other questions about the fundraising culture, signs of a healthy fundraising culture piece, or anything else that's come up so far? Okay, and here's just an example. This is from the Bright Spots report of how one organization, you know, sort of puts this into practice around fundraising culture. So this is Cheerla, which is down in Los Angeles. It's an immigrant rights group. And they have 2 fundraising things that they have all staff participate in every year. and they do a lot of check-ins. They're very transparent about it, and really sort of try to get people to follow through. And I like the last line of this, which is that they say it's not about public shaming of people to do your fundraising or else, but it's just about collective accountability. Like, we set these goals together. We all need the money in this organization to do our work, and so let's all participate in this effort to meet these goals as a group. So that's just one example of a group that how they put into practice their fundraising culture, right? So let's just do a quick check-in for you all. And this is going to be, I think this is going to be the polls, right, Hugo, that I gave you. So I would like to get a sense, hopefully folks are looking at their screens and they can see the polls and they're coming up. How strong where do you feel like your groups sort of lie right now as we're in terms of fundraising culture? So go ahead and pull up the first poll, Hugo. So there's poll number 1. You can go ahead and vote whenever you're ready. So does everyone in your organization, including board and staff, participate in fundraising in some way? So again, it can just be like once a year. It's not all the time, but is there ever a time in your organization when everybody participates in fundraising in some kind of way? Or can you confidently say that everybody in the organization has some kind of role in fundraising? And one of the choices is not sure, because maybe you don't know, right? Which is totally a valid answer. So that's the first question. And then the second question is, when your group does fundraising campaigns or activities, do you feel like people feel like they're part of a team? Or is it just a couple people, kind of off on their own, and they kind of report back to everyone else and say, this is how it went? And people go, yes, or, oh, you didn't do a good job. Is it a team effort, or is it like just really 1 or 2 people's jobs? So go ahead and vote on those. So we've got about 5 people voting. So we'll keep it open for another few seconds here. We've got 6 people voting. Looks like there's a few people that say that everyone in their organization does some kind of fundraising, which is awesome. And about 3 people feel like they're part of a fundraising team when they do campaigns, which is great. Anybody else?
There's 4 people left.
Okay, and they might be otherwise occupied. So it looks like, most of you, or a good, maybe like little less than half of you, there is some good signs of like fundraising culture, right? And then some folks, as far as the staff participation, aren't really sure. Or maybe sometimes it's sort of people participate in fundraising, but that's okay. This is just a temperature check. It's not like a way to like, this is right or wrong. It's just good to know, where does your organization stand right now? So I'm going to go ahead and end that poll. And then there's another one that Hugo's going to set up. So the second question, the second poll is going to come up now. So please take a look at that. So go ahead, Hugo, and you can pull up the second poll. All right, so the second poll, the questions are, is fundraising talked about regularly at all levels of your organization? So at the board level, at the staff level, are you talking about fundraising regularly, meaning like maybe at least once a quarter, once a month would be great, but maybe even just once a quarter? Are there like organization-wide updates about fundraising? Do you have a staff meeting where fundraising has an agenda item, a standing agenda item? So that's the first question. And then the second question is, does your group collectively own its fundraising successes and challenges, right? Or is it, again, just the ED or the development person or one person whose job it is to make sure all the money comes in, and if they don't do it, everybody gets mad at them? So those are the 2 questions to put out there. And it looks like Hugo Morales said that everyone participates in our annual over-the-air fundraising campaign, but there are some that they don't connect to document stories about our work that are good for telling foundations from where our real better comes from. I'm not sure if I understood your comment, Hugo, so I'm not sure if you want to elaborate on that, but it sounds like you do a fundraising campaign on the air every year that everyone participates in, right? Okay. All right, so it looks like folks are almost done voting for the second poll. And it looks like, more than half of you, fundraising is talked about regularly, which is great. And a little less than half of you are saying that you feel like your group collectively owns its fundraising successes and challenges. And other folks are saying no and sort of. So that's great. So again, just good to know, good kind of like temperature check, assessment. And it's something that you might want to do, bringing these questions to your team, to the other folks in your organization. And it's interesting because I do these kinds of assessments with organizations a lot, and I ask multiple people in an organization similar questions, and I'll get different answers, right? So some people will feel like, yeah, we always talk about fundraising, and someone else is like, oh, we hardly ever talk about fundraising. So that's also good information to have, right? That there's a different expectation around what even talking about fundraising or doing fundraising a lot means. So great, that's great, Hugo, that you raised 30,000 a year. That's awesome. All right, so we can stop that poll. All right, so now we're going to get into the actual steps of how you strengthen a fundraising culture, right? So you're already coming in probably with some level of, some of these practices. And these are the steps that I've laid out in my mind. When I look at groups and I'm trying to help them become stronger in their fundraising, these are the things that I look for, or the ways that I offer to them to help them get better at having a strong fundraising culture. So the first step is identifying fundraising champions, which we'll talk about in a second. And the second is just getting everybody involved. So we already talked about how that's a sign of a healthy fundraising culture, is everybody being involved in some way in fundraising. So if you're not already doing that, then this is time to try that out, right? The third thing is really doing collective training, practicing, and debriefing as a team. So it's important when you're trying to build a collective sense of accomplishment around fundraising that people have a chance to learn together how to do fundraising. They have a chance to practice together, and that usually means role plays and stuff like that. And then they have a chance to kind of evaluate and debrief at the end of a campaign, or even at the end of doing an ask or a fundraising event. They have a chance to get together and kind of go, how did that go? How did we do, and evaluate that activity. So we're going to spend most of our time on the first three steps. And the last two steps are recognize and reward and have fun. And we're not going to have time to go through those today, but those are the kinds of things that are really going to help your team feel positive about fundraising. And I'll give you a few ideas about how to do that at the end of the training today. So step one is really about identifying what I call champions, fundraising champions. So if you're the ED, or you're the development person, or the person who's in charge of fundraising, everybody expects you to talk about fundraising all the time, right? which is makes sense. And so what I'm saying with the identifying champions is that often when you're trying to shift fundraising culture, you definitely need more than just one person sort of getting excited and making the case for fundraising, right? And so this is just another voice to add to the room around bringing up fundraising, saying that we all need to be doing this. And this person can be anybody, really, anybody on your team, whether it's the staff or the board. And when I think about the kind of people that might be fundraising champions that I might want to engage in this way, I think about who gets excited when we talk about fundraising, like who likes it, or who at least is interested in it. Is there anybody that always offers to help when we're doing a fundraising campaign or some kind of fundraising activity? Is there always that one person who goes, hey, can I do this? Or do you need help with something, right? And then also, and sometimes this is the same person as, who gets excited about fundraising, and sometimes it's not. Is there somebody that a lot of people in the organization or on that particular team, whether it's like the board or staff, is there someone that everybody listens to, right? And so what can be challenging is if that person is actually anti-fundraising, which can happen, then it can be really challenging, right? Because then you have not a champion, you have kind of an antagonist or like an opponent. And so, but what can be interesting is sometimes that person, if you can turn them around and get them to be excited about fundraising, they can become the biggest ally, that you can have around changing your fundraising culture. So these are just some of the things that you might want to take into account as you're thinking about who else in the organization can I kind of get together with, put my head together with, to be like another voice around fundraising in the organization, right? Any questions about that? Because I know it can be a little bit abstract, but any questions about identifying champions? I'm not sure if I'm seeing everything in the chat, Hugo, so I'm not sure if I'm missing.
Nobody's posting. Very good.
Okay. Okay, so that's step one. And so, just think about who are maybe even current fundraising champions in your organization. Maybe there's a board member who always does every fundraising activity, right? Or a staff member who, really likes doing fundraising, is like always the one who brings in the money or brings in like new donors. And then think about how can you involve these people, right? So can it be even as simple as having them do the fundraising update or doing the update on how your event went? So one thing that I'm a big fan of is for, whoever's the main fundraiser in your organization, when you're trying to create that champion or sort of develop that champion's voice on fundraising, letting that person do some of the things that you would normally do, right? So if I'm the person as a development director or development manager who always gives the update on how the event went, like we had a great event, we raised this much money, maybe I let somebody else do that with me, or maybe I let them do the whole thing, because that changes the dynamic in your organization of who is allowed to talk about fundraising, who can be an expert on fundraising. It really does change. It sounds like a very small thing. And also, obviously that person would need to be prepared by you to do that update and supported by you to do that. But it really can have a huge impact, just having a different person who's not primarily a fundraiser be the person who's reporting back on a fundraising activity. So that's one specific thing you can do to engage them. So just want to take a second to see, for you all, who do you think could be some fundraising champions, or maybe just one fundraising champion in your organization? So again, this is somebody, not you, somebody else who can help you talk about fundraising more broadly in the organization, who can help influence other people to get excited about it. Who might that person be? And you can throw it in the chat. You don't have to put the person's name, but you can say like what their role is, or if you want to unmute and share an idea you have about who your fundraising champion might already be or could be. I would love to hear that. Interns. Did they get excited about fundraising, Hugo?
They can be.
Okay.
Train them.
Okay. The only reason I sort of reacted that way to interns is because they're usually temporary, right?
Yeah, I know, yeah. And maybe for like a fundraising campaign, like Hugo was saying too.
Yeah, so ideally there would be people who are going to be around for a while, because the cultural shift takes a long time. So we want somebody who's sort of, yeah. So board advisory.
I'll share an experience if it was, I think maybe COVID also helped, but we, sorry, I'll get on. We did like a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign with some of our youth. We have a program for youth at the organization that I'm representing. And they really wanted to do something. The regular program that they're involved in was kind of modified because of COVID, but they still wanted to do something. So they offered to help fundraise, and they did an online fundraising campaign for us and reached out to their network virtually. And it was, pretty good. And they were very involved, some of them more than others, but we had maybe 10 youth that did that. And yeah, it didn't go beyond that. And maybe that was our fault for not continuing to engage them. But in terms of responding to a crisis, to the pandemic, they really stepped up to the plate for that particular online peer-to-peer fundraising.
Yeah, and I feel like we saw that a lot with COVID, right? It's like there was a lot of rapid response work, a lot of emergency funds, and when the need is so great as it was, I saw a lot of fundraisers sort of get on the ground, real life training this last year, and it was great. It was great. I mean, it's horrible, of course, because the needs that we were trying to fill were so overwhelming. But yeah, I'm not surprised that you brought that up, and thank you for sharing that. Diana had a question about how do you recruit for a champion from your board? And we're going to talk about recruiting in a minute. We're actually going to do a role play of how to recruit people to be on your fundraising team. So that'll help with that a little bit. But I would think about, but before that, you have to think about who that person is. So again, is there somebody that gets excited about fundraising? Somebody who offers to help? It's even better if they're already somebody who's very well respected in the organization. That's a bonus. But I would say in the beginning, it's mostly getting somebody who's excited and who's willing to kind of do a little bit more than the bare minimum around fundraising. So hopefully that helps a little bit, Diana. And we'll talk about recruitment and asking people to be part of a fundraising team in a minute. So yeah, any other ideas about who could be your fundraising champions in your organization? All right, well, let's keep going. So that's another question you can keep thinking about. Then the next step, so there's step 1, which is identifying champions. Step 2 is getting everybody involved. So all of you seem to have, or a lot of you seem to have fundraising campaigns. So really just figuring out what's a way that we can get everyone's, hands, brains, sort of energy involved in that fundraising campaign. And again, it doesn't have to be a big role. Maybe they just ask 5 of their friends to give. Maybe they help with the social media aspect. Maybe they are, you know, calling their friends, whatever it is, but making sure that there's some kind of way for people to be involved. And so I wanted to just give some examples. So one way to do this is just to make sure we have multiple ways for people to participate in fundraising. And this may not be for one single campaign, you know, this is maybe for the course over the course of a year, but just making sure that we have multiple ways that people can participate. This is especially good for board members who can't always, because of their own time constraints and day jobs and families and stuff, can't always participate fully in maybe more staff-driven campaigns, but things like birthday fundraisers, or you know, calling donors to thank them. There's lots of different ways that you can be part of fundraising without necessarily having to go all in on a specific campaign that's like a 6-week long campaign, right? So so yeah, these are just some ways to do that, offering people different ways to participate in fundraising. And yes, I can send the link later on, Hugo, to the Bright Spots report for sure. So
you
that's
can
another.
give that to us, Rona, and then we can send out an email with that information.
Sure, of course. Yeah.
And then Danny did have a comment here. He's realizing they're a small organization and might not have the capacity to approach these strategies. Do you have anything for that for smaller organizations who are getting started?
Can you say a little bit more, Danny, about what you mean by that?
Yeah, thank you. You know, just sitting here listening to everything, I just realize more and more that you have to get to a certain point, I think, or a certain capacity with your organization to be able to have the manpower to do these types of things. And, you know, I don't think we're there yet. I have a board, but the board is very busy with their own full-time jobs and lives, and it's really just you know, my program director and I doing most everything. And we have teachers now, and I see how it's helpful to get everybody involved in having this culture of donor cultivation, but yeah, I just think it's tricky to get to that point too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the next thing we're going to do might help you with that, because we're going to talk about recruiting people. So it sounds like you just need, not just, it's a big just, but you need more people, right? And then you need to be able to kind of give them things to do that'll help you grow your donor base. So we're going to talk next about recruiting, which I think maybe will help you and will help Diana as well, because it sounds like you need more people, right? One is activating the people you already have, but it sounds like maybe they're kind of tapped out. So then I always look at, can we bring more people in? And, you know, more doesn't have to be like 20. It could be like 3 or 2, mm-hmm. and starting small. And the nice thing about donor work is that you can do it at whatever pace you can do it. You know, this is totally up to you. Nobody's telling you have to do this by a certain time. Of course, the benefit is that if you do it sooner rather than later, then you bring in money. but you know, you can do it at your own pace. And so yeah, so I think all of this can be adapted to groups that are more kind of starting out or have smaller staffs, totally fine. And, you know, when I say a fundraising team or even champions, I could be talking about like one person or like 2 or 3 people. It doesn't have to be a ton of people. Yeah. Right. So let's move to the recruitment piece, because I think that'll help with this, this question of like, I need more, you know, capacity, right? I need more people. And so we have to ask those people, right? So we're going to, after the break, after the break, we're going to take a break in a couple minutes. We're actually going to role play, like asking people to be part of our fundraising team. But this is obviously a really important part of any kind of fundraising culture, right? It's like, it's great if we have like nice policies about how much people are going to fundraise or how much they're going to give. But if we don't actually have like campaigns or things that they're doing or ways that they're actually like going out and fundraising, it doesn't really matter, right? So, and often, you know, especially now with COVID and just everybody's so overwhelmed, there are a lot of barriers, or there can be a lot of barriers to recruiting new people to your fundraising team or any new kind of volunteer activity with your organization, right? And so I think it's helpful before you even talk to anybody about joining a team to be prepared for some of the things they may like throw back at you as like, well, I can't do that because X, right? So for a second, I just wanted to pause for a second and have you all throw out, especially if you've already tried to recruit people to help you with fundraising or people to your board, what are some of the kind of reasons why people say that they can't do it, or maybe some of the fears that they have about doing fundraising. Does that make sense? So what are the common, I call them common objections. And I'm actually going to just go ahead and note take in the slide here. So I would say probably a big one is time, right? I don't have time. I love your organization. You guys are awesome. I don't have time, right? Is that something that you all encounter when you try to get people more involved? Yeah, which is valid, right? It's not like they're not making it up. I mean, everybody's really stressed out right now, right?
I've never done fundraising before.
I've never done fundraising before. Right. So like, I don't know how to do it.
Karen says, not my job. Anything else? And if there's anything in the chat, just let me know.
Mine's similar to Hugo's, but not good at asking for money. Not comfortable asking for money.
Okay, I'm gonna just put that with this one because it's pretty much the same.
Yeah.
Diane says conflicts. Apparently 2 of her 6 board members are EDs of other nonprofits. So maybe conflict of interests.
It's probably both conflict of interest and like a time issue. I would think that's part of it as well. Okay, let's start with those because those are really good ones. So I don't have time, right? If we design our like fundraising campaigns well, we should be able to allow people to work on them without having to give us everything, right? Shouldn't become like a part-time job, right? So for example, I don't know anyone who has money to give. That's a good one too. I don't know anybody with money. So I'm gonna just take, actually, let's do this since we don't have time to go through all of them. Let's just do a quick vote. Who would like for me to address the I don't have time one? You can raise your hand or put in the chat. Is that one interesting to you? Okay, the people who are not on video, I can't see you obviously. So the people who are on video, you're not raising your hand. I've never done fundraising. I'm not good at it. I'm not comfortable. Is that one that people hear a lot and want to have addressed today? Okay, so we'll do that one. It's not my job to fundraise. Do people hear that one a lot? Kind of, sort of. Okay. Conflict of interest. I might deal with that just because it's a kind of special one. I don't know anyone with money. That actually kind of goes along with I've never done fundraising. Okay, so let me do this one. I want to highlight that one. So I've never done fundraising. I don't know how to do it. I'm not comfortable, not good at it. Okay, so the way that I would address this, that I would say, it's totally fine that you don't know how to fundraise or you don't feel like you have the experience. I didn't know how to fundraise, when I did my first campaign, and we're going to provide you with all the support that you need to do this, right? We're going to give you tools. We're going to help you practice. We're going to give you scripts. So we're going to be with you like every step of the way to make sure that you have the tools and the things that you need to do this well. And I will be here, or whoever would be there, like connecting person. I'll be here if you have any questions. We'll make sure that you have what you need to do this. So what do you think? And then I would just bring it back to like asking them again. So that's one way that I would address it. What are other ways that people might want to address that sort of I've never done fundraising before? Anybody have ideas?
Maybe it's a good skill to have, especially if you're going to provide the training.
I have one that's too long to type. It's more kind of my own issue. Would it work to encourage people to just share the mission, even if it's not, and basically just grow the number of people that are aware of what you're doing and have that be an introductory approach, or is that just missing the mark?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're actually trying to ask people to be part of a fundraising campaign, that's not going to get you very far, right? I'm actually asking about, so if we're trying to get people to actually do fundraising. So it's one thing if you just want people to talk about your mission, that in of itself is not fundraising, right? It's just not. The person who's getting that pitch will be like, great, so now what? What do I do? And So if they're doing that much anyway, I would just say to go ahead and ask for money, because people are going to be wondering, like, why are you telling me about this group? Yeah. Danny, did you want to add something?
I was just going to say, maybe encourage them to try it, because the only way to learn something and become better at it is to do it. I never thought of myself as the grant writer, never wrote grants, but now I know how to write grants, and I've learned to do it along the way. I'm one of those ones who's uncomfortable asking people. I find it easier to spend time writing a grant. But I think just encouraging people to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think sharing your own story and sharing that you're uncomfortable, like it's not something that you feel like super, comfortable with either, but we're going to do it together, right? It's sort of like, let's try it out. We're going to do it together. That to me can like really help assuage a lot of people's fears, because I think what people fear most is like they're going to be kind of on their own and left to their own devices, and what am I doing? And so if you say like, hey, we're going to figure this out together, we're going to do this as a group, that's one way to, and then sharing your own discomfort, I think really makes it more okay for people to be uncomfortable. Just because you're uncomfortable doesn't mean that you can't do this, right? For some people also, if they've been involved with your organization in other ways, like let's say, for example, they've, if you do organizing and they've spoken at an event or done other things that for a lot of people are kind of scary and like kind of big things, I would say, I would just say, hey, you're going to be great at this. Like you spoke at that city council event and you talked to the media, like that's scary. And like a lot of people don't know how to do that either. And you've done that and you've been great at it. So I know you can do this, right? Just like helping them realize they can translate some of the skills they already have to fundraising, so. Okay, so with that, we're at 12:30 and I know we're going to 1, and I had wanted to take a break, but you all had such great questions that we didn't get to that. And so I would like to just keep going unless people want to do a quick like 2-minute stretch break before we do the final thing today. What do people think? Stretch break?
Yeah, a minute or two maybe. But I'm okay with it.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's do a 2-minute stretch break. So we'll come back at just about 12:30 and then we'll do the final half hour of our time together today. All right. See you in a bit. Okay. All righty. So let's go ahead and come back. Thanks everyone for being okay with a very short break, but we will end on time. So that's good. So what I want to do now is have you actually practice, how you would recruit somebody to your fundraising team. And so I want you to think about somebody, and this doesn't have to be someone you actually want to recruit like today, but maybe somebody that you would like to have on a fundraising team or have on your board or in some kind of capacity helping you with fundraising. And think about what are some of the objections or the questions or concerns that they might have if you ask them. Like hopefully you know them well enough to know like, oh, they're really busy or they don't have fundraising experience. Like they might be some of the objections that are here in the slide, or they might be something different. And so just to take a minute to think about who that person is and what might be a reason that they might not want to be on your fundraising team, and how you would address that, how you would kind of try to try to persuade them that hey, that's okay that you don't have fundraising experience, or hey, it's okay that you don't know any rich people. That one's a very, very common one, and it really kind of breaks my heart because that really has in some ways so little to do with whether someone can fundraise well or not. I've had people that I know are very wealthy donors who have a lot of very wealthy friends come up to me and have the same exact questions that people who don't have a lot of money have about fundraising. I don't know how to fundraise. How do I ask people for money? So it has nothing to do, well, I shouldn't say nothing, but confidence in fundraising and being able to do it is not equal, I'm rich, or I know rich people, right? So anyway, okay, so does anybody have somebody in mind that you'd like to try to recruit? And for the folks whose video are off, we're actually going to break into small groups. So hopefully you're still there. And this is the chance to ask any questions about what the exercise is going to be, because I'm going to go over that right now. So again, you're going to have somebody in mind that you want to recruit to your fundraising team. It could be a board member, it can be staff, it could be a volunteer. And what you're going to do is we're going to have you break out into groups of 3, and you're each going to take turns practicing how to ask this person to join your fundraising team. So I'm going to have the 3 roles are going to be volunteer, or it could be a board member, whoever it is that you're recruiting, right? The person you're recruiting. And then the coordinator is the person asking the volunteer or the board member to be on the fundraising team. And then the observer, the 3rd person, is just going to watch the interaction and kind of afterwards will give some feedback and just say how it went. And they'll also be the timekeeper. Okay, so the volunteer or the board member who's going to be recruited, the coordinator who's the person doing the recruiting, and then the observer is going to keep time and kind of observe the role play. And so you'll have 10 minutes total each person. Actually, we'll be able to do that. Probably less than that. Let's say, yeah, well, maybe like 7 minutes. So because we'll have about 20 minutes to do this. So 7 minutes per person to kind of set up the role play, do your quick ask. And, you know, for the person being recruited, you know, definitely like in the setup, the person who's doing the recruiting should say, you know, I know this person's going to say, I don't know any rich people, right? Set them up with the objection so that they can do in the role play, they can pretend that they're that person and bring up that objection and that, you know, concern, and you can, you know, practice how you would deal with that. So then go ahead and do your role play of the ask, and then for about 3 minutes, and then you're going to debrief for a minute and then just switch to the next person. So it's going to go pretty fast, but it's a good way just to practice doing this kind of thing so that when you go out and have to do it for real, hopefully you'll be a little more confident recruiting people to your team. How did it go? I'm curious how it went, your little role plays. Anyone want to share?
Caitlin is reporting for us, for our group.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a problem.
You know
with
you were
that.
going to do that?
I was keyed in a little. Yeah. Ours went really well. So in our group, Hugo was asking Karen who was a board member, to join the fundraising fun, the fun in fundraising. And he had a really great approach in that he started with a shared vision for why we're doing this work. He asked what she was willing to commit to, bringing it back to sustainability, always looping it back to it being a team effort and back to just the larger goal of the mission work. And Karen met him partway, and then she actually offered a lower level engagement. She offered to come stuff envelopes, and Hugo kept his eye on the prize and said, actually, I would really love your contacts. So it was fun to watch their negotiations back and forth. And in the end, he was successful.
All right, let's give Hugo a hand. Sound like that was a tricky one. There's a lot of different things you had to do there. And good for, who's your partner again? Who are you asking? Was it Karen? Sorry.
Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, Karen. Karen did a good job role-playing, being the difficult board member. Anyone else want to share anything that happened in your team or things that you noticed about the role play, things you learned? Sorry, things you learned.
I can share a little bit. So I realized, because of the infancy of our goals in this space, going from doing a letter at the end of the year that has a very small mailing list associated with it, that I think I have the opportunity to build a team with my ask being more around help us build our strategy and kind of define what we need to be doing, the type of touch points we need to start building into our culture. And it's more of a strategic conversation that I want people to join, with the goal of them sticking around to help execute, because we don't have anything to invite them to help with at the moment, other than developing a more a better fundraising culture.
Mm-hmm.
So find people that have been in those situations before that could help us build that.
Got it. That's great. Well, that's a good realization to come to. Like, you know, you're still building. You're still trying to figure out what is the thing that you want people to do, and that's totally fine. But it would be good to have some people help you with that. So that's your ask. Great, awesome. So I know it's just about 1 o'clock. I'm actually fine with staying a few minutes longer since I know that, but I don't know if that's okay with the fund or with other folks here. But I'm fine to stay for a few more minutes just to see if people want to ask any more questions of me or each other. Is that, yeah, I don't know if that's possible. Patricia or Hugo,
Yeah,
is that
anyone who
okay?
wants to stay on can. I can stay on, Rona. No problem
Okay.
with
Okay, cool. Yeah, so let's just maybe like 5 more minutes. And I would just, if there's anyone else that wants to share how the role play went, that'd be great to hear. Otherwise, we can just kind of open it up to any questions, any final questions folks have about the training and things we covered today.
Well, I would just quickly say that, you know, Diana and I kind of had the, I might be frozen right now. Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Can you hear me?
I can hear your voice.
Okay.
I want to turn off your video, Danny.
Okay,
That'll
great.
help.
Diana and I, yeah, I'll do that. Diana and I were kind of in the same boat of, you know, talking about being small, and she was even one more step above us, where I'm realizing through all this that I really need to start first with board development. And so, Rona, I don't know if you do those talks too, but I would be really interested in attending that one, because I feel like to even get to the place where you're able to do the things that you talked about today, you need to have a really strong and engaged board to kind of take over some of those duties. You know, because as I was explaining to my group, we're so caught up in our operations all day, every day, that we just don't find time for the other things. And I think that all comes from the board.
So I can speak to that just really quickly then, Rona, please. But we've been asked to do board development trainings, and we do plan on partnering with Santa Barbara Foundation to do that. So please just kind of stand by for that announcement of board development.
Excellent.
Training.
I will be on top of that one.
Great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's I think most organizations probably could use board development work. I don't think it ever goes away, even with bigger boards. It probably just gets more complicated. So welcome to the nonprofit dilemma of the board. It's just always, you know, managing a very busy group of people who you want to do amazing stuff, and they want to do it too, and it's just limited time and resources. So, you know, I'm glad that the fund will be offering that, and you know, especially what my work is around boards is usually around fundraising, but it's often not a fundraising issue I'm dealing with. It's stuff around capacity and policies and, you know, just being on the same page about what we're all supposed to do. So it's just a really common thing. So so glad you had that realization. I hope you get the help that you need to make that happen. Any other questions? Just opening it up to anything else that we covered today. And I'm sorry we didn't get to the last couple slides there, but yeah, I did want to be responsive to your questions earlier. So any other or comments that you have for other folks, ideas you want to share with people about how to, you know, deal with some of the issues that you're all dealing with now that you've gotten a chance to talk to each other more about your specific challenges? All right. All right, well, it looks like folks are ready to wrap up. And yes, I will send a couple things out to Hugo and Patricia to pass on to you afterwards, the Bright Spots report. I think the article about asking clients to be donors. And I think those are the two things. Hopefully that's not, and then the slides will also be sent to you as well. And there's going to be a recording, right, available on the website for people who missed the session today. And so you can share that with folks later on.
We'll have the recording and the slides on our website. And I also, I found that Bright Spots
oh, there we go.
website, and the report is downloadable from there. But we'll, of course, include it in the wrap-up email. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rona, for bringing us this really, you know, critical information that we all can use. And again, I would encourage you to share the recording and the slides with your board. and with your team. You know, it's just a great learning opportunity for anyone who missed it. And we plan on doing that here at the fund for Santa Barbara, and really just taking advantage of the silver linings of Zoom, which is the ability to record these. So thanks again, everyone, for taking the time. And Rona, thank you.
Thanks
Google,
for
thank you for your support as well.
Yeah. Thanks everyone, and good luck with your fund.